Hey everyone, welcome back to the Long View. And I am here with Jason Stanley of the University of Toronto, a scholar of fascism, authoritarian politics, and much more. Jason, it's great to talk to you on Substack.
Great to talk to you, Julian. It's great to be in conversation.
So I've been reading a lot of your articles over the years about universities and higher education, which is something on my mind. And I wanted to just start. You wrote some really interesting pieces on this idea of viewpoint diversity and this effort we're seeing from the administration and states to impose that or to create it. I'm curious. Um, Kind of what do you think of the idea, if you could talk about that and its legitimacy and value?
Well, I mean, it's true that take Yale University, 2.3%, according to a recent study by the Buckley Institute, the conservative institute at Yale, 2.3% of Yale's faculty are registered Republicans, and that's a small number. But in the biological sciences, that's 1.4%. So there are more political scientists than biologists who are registered Republicans at Yale. There's the math department at Yale has one registered Republican. Uh, Molecular biology and biophysics has none. There's like five or six hard science departments and biological science departments that have no registered Republicans. So what are we asking for when we're asking for a an affirmative action program for registered Republicans, which is what we're asking for? Nothing like this. No one's going to hire. No one's asking for affirmative action for Marxists. I mean, my philosophy department at Yale had no Marxists. It had no anarchists. Why are we? What's the point of going after uh, self-identified registered Republicans in this when the Republican Party is, by all measures, a very hard right party? So this is clearly an ideological takeover. It's an ideological takeover that's backed by people who want to control more institutions in American life. They've got the Supreme Court, they've got the presidency, they've got the Senate, they've got the House, they've got the billionaires. So, they want the universities. And of course, the many universities, unfortunately, are capitulating to this because they want to remain powerful. They want to remain connected to power. Unlike my home institution of the University of Toronto, America has these universities, such as my previous institution, your institution, that pride themselves on being connected to power. And to me, that's not what academia is. And so, what we're seeing is the result of a 10-year-long propaganda war against universities. It started in 2015. Everybody's seen these stats. In 2015, the American public uh, uh, started losing trust in universities. Well, what
Mhm.
happened in 2015? If you remember, there was the Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff piece of the coddling of the American mind in the Atlantic. And that started a series of attacks on students and universities. Uh, and it was not what was happening at universities. It was this mainstream media propaganda attack that was saying the greatest threat to democracy was leftists on campus. And so, that really seems like, and then if you think about some of the culture war aspects of this, it was, the Haidt and Lukianoff stuff started when Black Lives Matter went onto campuses. So the first was University of Missouri, as you recall, in 2015.
Yeah.
And then Yale had next Yale because we had Calhoun College, which is named after John C. Calhoun, the sort of theorist of slavery, who said it's a necessary good, and rather than that, rather than evil or even necessary evil. So the students wanted that name changed. I had three Black philosophy majors come to me in September 2015 and say no one's ever seen a Black person on a philosophy syllabus at Yale. That seemed to me a legitimate complaint. And so much of this is in reaction to a bunch of students saying America's still racist. Well, hey.
And you also kind of make a important point in one of your articles that this could actually result not only in a policy that is poorly skewed toward one group, but actual degradation of the kind of work that we see in higher education. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, what is going to be if you hire someone for their political views? First of all, they have to retain their political views. They can't change their political views. I think both you and I know personally people who are sort of professional conservatives, and they
Mhm.
have to stay professional conservatives because that's, why they have the positions they do. We don't want people in academia who have to remain in an ideological position. I've occupied many ideological positions in my lifetime. Uh, and, when we ask ourselves, no one seriously believes that molecular biology and biophysics discriminates against Republicans. No one seriously believes that. No one seriously believes that the math department at uh, at Yale or Princeton discriminates against Republicans. That's a ludicrous. Anyone who says that doesn't understand what we do. So there's something about what we do is we look for academic merit. Uh, that's honestly what we do. There are reasons to think about other considerations. I think there are reasons to think about other considerations based on justice, based on the history of the United States, and there's a very clear history of slavery. Our institutions had that history. The Princeton President's House, Princeton president, there were three enslaved people living there. So those redress reasons make sense to me. But why would you have redress for Republicans? They control the whole country. They control the Supreme Court. Like I am not getting the redress reasons there. And I'm not getting why a Republican perspective is going to, is going to help you in the math department or the physics department. The fact is, the contemporary Republican Party is anti-intellectual. So it's no surprise that there are so few registered Republicans. But hey, if a registered Republican, you know, does something in philosophy of language or epistemology, you have great philosophers at your university who are registered
Mhm.
Republicans who have established themselves legitimately as seriously good philosophers. No one cares that Tom Kelly is a Republican, honestly. He's an excellent epistemologist. So, if that consideration, I've never seen that consideration enter into a philosophy department's decision making. I've never seen us we have plenty of people who might not be registered Republicans, but they're more conservative, who are Spinoza scholars or especially like Aquinas scholars or medieval philosophers. Uh, that's pretty metaphysicians, but that just doesn't enter in. And I'm not seeing, like, for me, the impact of a scholar's work. You can measure that, the productivity over time, the mentorship. Those are qualities we look at in a scholar. This is entirely from left field
Mm.
viewpoint diversity. And then what it suggests about universities, it's like you know, it suggests that that's been a factor all along. And it's simply absurd to say that the Yale math department only has one registered Republican because of discrimination against Republican mathematicians.
And what do you tell people? I get this all the time. I'm curious what you say. And I think I saw a comment about this that in the humanities, in particular, students are being brainwashed, and that the skew of identification or political ideology impacts how the students learn or what they learn.
One thing that this is astonishing to me because I think a lot of people haven't met young people. I mean, I've never, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I've taught students text, but I've had a lot of conservative students in my classes. They like to challenge me, my philosophy of education class. Some of them came to my propaganda class, which was the class that I started teaching because I wanted to have a philosophy class with a lot of Black authors on the syllabus. And so, I've had a lot of students challenge me in those classes. And that some of them have been my best students, but actually, I've never. One example here. Let's take gender. Uh,
Mhm.
does that come from us? Does that come from the professoriate? Non-binary views of gender, gender variability. My little kids have those views on gender. No one's brainwashing them. It's a what it is. It's a generational thing. Just
Right.
like in the 60s, were all the protesters being, no one was brainwashing 18, 19, 20-year olds during the encampments. Uh, that our students are the ones who that comes from. The different views on gender, that comes from our students. That does not, a lot of us are too old for that. And
Yeah.
so that's a misunderstanding of young people.
Tulsa, I'll just say, I mean, conservative students who came of age in the 80s and 90s were being taught by professors from the 1960s, and it didn't impact their
Excellent
development
point.
and
Yeah,
maturation. It's not even a
right.
one way story.
Yeah. And a
And,
and also, like, I'm in a philosophy department,
yeah.
and, philosophy is a very conservative field, so, it's a misunderstanding of the humanities. Classics, philosophy, there are quite conservative fields, so, that are not necessarily in terms of registered Republicans, because the Republican Party has moved so far to the right and to the intellect and to a kind of anti-intellectualism. Um, but I mean, I wish I had more effect on my students. I think I
Right.
teach my students text, but my
Right.
students come to me with the views that they have from their peers and the views that they have. I mean, just think of the encampments. I mean, that was something that, or think of Next Yale, which was the Black student movement, um, or in Missouri. So we can
Hmm.
at the University of Missouri. That didn't come from the professors in the University of Missouri. That came from students who are from St. Louis, East St. Louis, and at the University of Missouri. No, they weren't learning that in their classes. That was the
And
point. It was
yeah.
because they weren't learning that in their classes.
And why do you think? I mean, I want to get to the political realm in a second and what you have written about internationally, but in terms of the mainstream media, 2015, and I mean, some of it is a reaction maybe to Black Lives Matters, but why else does the media, they go really in on this narrative? We see it all the time.
Yeah.
Why
Yeah.
do you think they have absorbed this so thoroughly?
It's a great question. The New York Times op-ed page was obsessed with leftists on campus, as if leftists on campus were the greatest threat to democracy. They were the Trump campaign. They were the New York Times op-ed page, with a few exceptions. The Atlantic. This was the Trump campaign. This was like, oh, wokeness is a disease. They hired people specifically. I mean, John McWhorter is a first-rate sociolinguist, but he had a certain anti-woke. He published a book about race Marxism, and it turns out that all of those students were right. It turns out that actually there still is racism in the United States. You know,
Mm.
I mean, it's pretty wild what the New York Times pulled over on us. It's pretty wild what these telling us that there was too much focus on racism, that there was too much, when, we just saw the loss of the Voting Rights Act. Uh, so it's a great question that you're asking. I mean, I think, uh, it, you know, uh, to me, I mean, it's probably because these institutions, like universities, are filled with anti-woke white dudes who are then hiring, representative people who might, be members of minority groups who agree with them. There was I think, like, if I think about my departments I've been in, the universities are filled with anti-woke white dudes.
Mm,
And so, as you know, both of us know that. It seems like not known to the public at large that
yeah,
that transforming like making universities slightly more aware that they should be have a larger perspective uh, is uh, is as much of a struggle as it is anywhere else. And then it turns out that all of that focus of our students was absolutely right. And now is that we see views change on Gaza and Israel, it turns out that the very thing that people were complaining about in the encampments, that my Jewish students who were out there in the encampments were saying, is now kind of mainstream public opinion. So, uh, so you know, uh, why the newspapers did the Trump campaign's work for them, because that's what they did. They did the hysteria about, about wokeness. That
yeah.
really comes from uh, why they bought into it. And then now we're rewarding that. Now universities are tripping over themselves to hire all these people who made their dime on hysteria about wokeness. Um, it's not going to
Yeah.
help.
Yeah, and it's also, it's a particular view of young people, meaning that they are almost helpless, and my experience, I'm just trying to get them to turn in a paper usually, rather than anything else, but it is a very, kind of idea that they are totally malleable, and they don't have opinions of their own, and they don't push back and,
I think
take what
I
they want from a class.
I think it's a lot of people who don't have exposure to young people. We,
Yeah,
as university professors, we see these waves of young people coming. As you say, in the '90s, we saw a lot of conservative students, a lot of students who want. I was teaching at Cornell, the students who want to go into finance, or I mean, it was a much sort of less political time
right.
in on campuses. But the students change, the waves of students change. It was groups of Jewish students at Yale who came to me because I'm, let's say, very publicly Jewish, the who came to me at Yale to say, we're really worried about this, and we have criticisms of Israel, and then there were those months where they weren't reporting on the fact that among the largest groups on in the encampments were the Jewish students in the universities. It
Right.
took like 3 or 4 months for the papers to realize that this is a struggle between Jewish people as well. Uh,
And you oh, sorry. I mean, but the other thing you've written about is just in governments that are authoritarian, higher education is often, one of the first targets. And can you talk about that just to put all of this in international perspective?
Oh, it needs to be put into international perspective. Universities are, I mean, Viktor Orban, who his first thing, I was in Hungary in 2009 and 2010. I was connected to CEU, Central European University. I still am. He vilified Central European University. He said, Maria Schmidt, the historian who sort of was his one of his main uh, uh, intellectuals, as it were, they were saying Central European University was turning students gay. Now,
Mm,
I don't think you can turn students gay, but that was the thing that Central, and they threw Central European University out of the country uh, via this campaign, saying European University was turning students gay. So it was an anti-LGBTQ campaign. Of course. So universities. So why are universities targets? Why is science a target? That's what we're seeing now. You had a discussion about that, I believe, earlier
yes.
today. I talk about this in How Fascism Works, a book I published 8 years ago, where I say, all authoritarians view science as a threat. Science is good if it gives them rockets. Uh, Hitler even says it's good as, if it's subservient to the needs of the nation. So Stalin, we know about Stalin's manipulation of science because authoritarians want to be the last. They're the epistemic authorities. The truth stops with them. Science is an enormous threat to that. And we're seeing that with public health. We're seeing that with vaccines. We're seeing how authoritarians profit. They get political success from claiming a monopoly on even on scientific truth. That's what we're seeing with Robert Kennedy. That's what we're seeing with Trump and vaccines. So so science stands apart from the political realm, from the political in the narrow sense, as we know. You know, academic hiring is always political, but the science, so science gets attacked because it's this. It claims independent authority from the authoritarian. And that is just that very existence of an independent authority is threatening. Trump wants to say that what he said, he wants to align the popular opinion on public health in a way that will give him popularity. He wants to overturn what scientists say to get more votes and support. There can't be an independent realm there. And then universities have students in them. And if you and this is by a bipartisan complaint because the smashing of the encampments, whatever you think of the of those protests, the smashing of the encampments is why students today are not protesting against the attack on democracy. So the New York Times, like Thomas Edsall, had a piece about this, wringing his hands about why aren't students protesting? They're not protesting because of all the stuff Thomas Edsall was complaining about. Because
Mm.
every time they protested, they were viciously attacked in the mainstream media, and so that was so universities are the source of protests. In the '60s, they were the anti-war protests against Vietnam. The encampments were anti-war protests against Israel's war in Gaza. Uh, the that's where protests are. And obviously, universities are going to be the source of protests against authoritarianism. Uh, it's no mystery. Thomas Edsall's question of why students aren't protesting is no mystery. Uh, you know, Under Biden, students got smashed for protesting,
Mm.
and then during the Black Lives Matter protests, they got humiliated, attacked, ridiculed in the mainstream media. So for the New York Times to go around and ask, why aren't they protesting now? Well, so look at Bangladesh as another example. Bangladesh students protested against Sheikh Hasina. They were the fulcrum of the protests against her. They drove her out of the country. We'll never know how many were killed, but hundreds and hundreds of them. So, you know, that's what the going after the universities is, the smashing of the encampments, which was bipartisan, and the smashing of protests was, did in fact instill fear in students.
And how much, I mean, part of it is protests and kind of civil disruption, and part of it seems also to be, as you said a little earlier, just independent ideas. And I'm curious. I mean, you're a philosopher; you study that. Are they right? Meaning, do authoritarian governments who have guns, weapons, and the strong arm of government, are they threatened by independent ideas beyond the protests? Kind of what is the value of the idea in fighting this kind of regime?
Great question. Well, yeah, I mean, what is the value of free dissent? Uh, there's one narrative. Like, look at I mean, you're a historian. Look at patriotic education. Look at they obviously feel incredibly threatened by. I mean, take the idea of. Let me give an example. Uh,
Mhm.
right now, racism is having a moment. Let's say in the United States, and I mean, it's had a lot of moments before, but it's really, really getting explicit. It's a source of support for the authoritarian. We have a kind of authoritarianism that I've argued is fascist in character, but a kind of American fascism that involves our racial hierarchy, our traditional racial hierarchies, and the authoritarian that we have is one who is representing white men as sort of at the top of the totem pole. So they're going after the idea of structural racism. They're going after the idea that non-white men uh, do not occupy positions of power because of structural barriers. So that's the ideology of this regime. That's an old American ideology, of course, uh, and so they're as we know, they're eliminating black people in positions of power everywhere. So uh, to justify that regime ideology, you have to attack the idea that there's structural barriers to success that, say, black Americans face and women face. So that's so it's like there's a regime ideology in the Soviet Union. It was one ideology. In the United States, white supremacy, xenophobia. So you have to make that regime ideology unchallengeable,
Mm.
uh, and that's what's going on.
And before I get to my final question, thank you to all the subscribers who are watching this. It's nice to have a nice audience, and we'll watch it when we send it out later. And thank you to the paid subscribers who support independent journalism. I mean, my final question is: so you publicly moved from Yale to the University of Toronto, and now it's been uh, I
A
don't think
year.
it's been a year yet. And I'm curious in terms of your perspectives of what's going on at universities. What have you learned from being in Toronto rather than being here? I'm curious, kind of what your insights are.
Yeah, I mean, the decision to move, it's not clear to me. It was a political decision. It was a very abstract decision of like, you know, this is a political message to send. Uh, and came at great sacrifice because I loved Yale. I loved my life. I loved my life in New York City. Uh, so it was kind of shocking at 56 to move. And Canada is really a different country. I'm learning a lot about Canada, and it's teaching me a lot about the United States. Because, for instance, legacy Black Canadians were loyalists
Mhm.
who came to Canada and sort of have an understanding of the United States that's been very interesting to me. But it's really a different country with different understandings of things. I think there's some of the same problems. There's definitely some of the same problems with criticisms of Israel that you have in the United States as well, which is, I think, a free speech issue. So you do have some of the similar free speech issues, but there's also a real sensitivity, especially now, to those issues. There's a real sensitivity to the distinction between the United States and Canada. So everybody, when they talk to me in Canada, when they interview me in Canada, they want to know about academic freedom. And so, in Canada right now, if you said my academic freedom is being impinged upon, you that's really going to send messages about the United States. People are really into the idea that Canada has, is better right now than the United States on democracy indices. So, if you were a professor whose free speech was being impinged upon, you went to the newspapers with that, it's going to make a much larger sound, louder sound than it would in the United States right now, because Canadians are proud of the fact that what's happening here is not happening there.
Jason Stanley, the University of Toronto. Thanks for doing this. I hope we can do it again and touch on some other issues. It's really a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, always.
Bye bye.